6 weeks before my daughter-in-law was supposed to sign the final papers on a $340,000 house she planned to buy with my retirement savings, I sat in my car outside the credit union and changed every password, every PIN, and every authorized name on every account I owned. My hands were not shaking the way you might expect. They were steady. That was the part that surprised me most. After everything I had heard, after everything I had read in that folder, something in me had simply gone quiet and clear, the way a room goes still right before a storm breaks through. My name is Helen. I am 66 years old. I spent 31 years as a school librarian, raised one son, buried one husband, and paid off this house with my own 2 hands. I am not dramatic by nature. I am not a woman who looks for conflict. I am the kind of person who replaces the toilet paper roll before it runs out and returns grocery carts even in the rain. So when I tell you what happened, I want you to understand that I did not go looking for this. It came looking for me, one small request at a time, until it had its hands around everything I had ever worked for. My husband Gerald passed 3 years ago last November. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. It happened so fast that for the first 6 months afterward I kept expecting to hear his key in the front door, kept setting 2 cups out for coffee before I remembered. Grief does strange things to your habits. It lives in your hands before it reaches your head. My son moved back home 8 months after we lost his father. He was 39, and his wife had just given birth to their second child. They said the apartment was too small. They said daycare costs were impossible. They said it would only be temporary, just long enough to save a real down payment. I said yes because Tyler was 7 months old and smelled like warm bread, and because the house felt too large and too silent, and I could not stand either of those things anymore. That was 18 months ago. At first it was fine. Better than fine, honestly. My daughter-in-law cooked sometimes. My son fixed the leaky faucet in the hall bathroom that Gerald had been meaning to get to for 2 years. Tyler learned to walk in my living room. There were muddy shoes by the front door and cartoons on Saturday mornings, and the smell of someone else's coffee in my kitchen, and all of it felt like being pulled back from the edge of something I had not fully named. Then things shifted. Not all at once. Never all at once with these things. It started with the card. My daughter-in-law needed gas one Tuesday and said she had left her wallet at work. Could she use mine? Just this once? Of course. Then it was groceries because the app was glitching. Then it was Tyler's shoes because payday was Friday and they were on sale today only. I told myself this was what family did. I told myself Gerald would have said the same. The repayments never came. I stopped expecting them. And somehow the stopping felt like my idea, like generosity, like the choice of a woman who did not need to keep score. I did not realize until much later that she had counted on exactly that. My son was working long hours at a logistics company. He was tired most evenings, distracted in a way that read as stress, but, I now understand, was something closer to guilt wearing the face of exhaustion. My daughter-in-law was home during the day with Tyler. She talked a lot about a life she wanted. She followed accounts on her phone that showed enormous kitchens with waterfall countertops and backyards with built-in fire pits. She said things like, people our age shouldn't still be renting, even though they were not renting anything. They were living in my house, in my late husband's house, without paying $1 toward it. There is a version of me, the version from 2 years ago, who would have felt ashamed to even think that sentence. Now, I just think it is accurate. About 3 months ago, my son started being unusually kind. Not the ordinary kind that comes from love, but a performed kind, deliberate and slightly too warm. The kind that makes the back of your neck feel strange. He brought home flowers once, just because. He asked me how I was sleeping. He suggested we go through old photo albums together, something we had not done since the year Gerald died. One evening he sat beside me on the porch swing while Tyler ran in the yard catching fireflies, and he said, unprompted, "Mom, I just want you to know I think about Dad every single day." It touched me. I told myself I was overthinking the timing. The night I found out the truth started like any other Tuesday. Tyler had gone to bed early with a slight fever. My son was supposedly working late. My daughter-in-law said she was on the phone with her sister and closed the bedroom door. I went downstairs around 11 for water and a sleeve of crackers because I had not eaten much at dinner and my stomach was reminding me of that fact. The kitchen light was off, but the small lamp in the dining room was on. I could hear typing. Then a voice, low and purposeful, my daughter-in-law speaking to someone she thought could not hear her. I stopped in the hallway. I heard her say, "The title is still just in her name, but Marcus says she trusts him enough to sign anything if it's framed right." A pause. "The financial planner meeting is already scheduled. We just need her there." Another pause, and then a sound that turned my stomach because it was a laugh, small and private and completely at ease. "She won't push back if Marcus is sitting right beside her. You know how mothers are." I stood in that hallway for a long time after she stopped talking, long enough that my bare feet went cold on the tile, long enough that the refrigerator cycled off and the house became very quiet. Then I walked back upstairs without my crackers. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark with my eyes open, listening to Tyler breathe through the baby monitor. I still kept on my nightstand even though he was well past the age for it, because the sound of him sleeping had become one of my favorite sounds in the world. And I thought about what I had heard, slowly and carefully, the way I used to think through a problem for a student who was struggling, looking at it from every angle before I decided what it meant. The financial planner meeting. Framed right, she trusts him enough to sign anything. By morning, I had decided two things. I would not let them see that I knew, and I would find out exactly what they were planning before any meeting happened. I have a friend named Beverly who worked for 30 years as a loan officer and still knows more about financial documents than most people half her age. I called her that same morning while my daughter-in-law was in the shower and my son had already left for work. I told Beverly only that I was worried something was happening with my accounts and asked if she would meet me for coffee. She said yes without asking questions. Beverly has always been that kind of friend. At the coffee shop that Thursday, I told her everything I had heard. She listened without interrupting, which is one of her gifts. When I finished, she set down her cup and looked at me with the expression of someone who has seen this before and is not surprised and wishes she were. "Helen," she said, "what you're describing sounds like the early stages of a real estate scheme, using your assets as the foundation. If they're talking about framing something for your signature, they're likely targeting either a joint title transfer, a loan co-signature, or a power of attorney structured around a so-called financial plan." I asked her what I should do. She told me to pull every account statement I could access for the last 6 months and look for anything I had not authorized. She told me to contact my credit union before any scheduled meeting, and she told me, very plainly, that I should not go to that meeting alone. I drove home and spent that afternoon going through every paper in Gerald's old filing cabinet. He had been meticulous, labeled folders for everything, tax returns going back to 1987, insurance policies, utility records, the deed to the house. I pulled the last 6 months of statements and sat at the kitchen table while Tyler napped and spread them across the wood. What I found took me 20 minutes to piece together and approximately 40 years of patience not to react to out loud. There were charges I had not made. Small ones mostly, spaced apart enough to seem like noise. An online clothing retailer I had never heard of. A subscription box. A restaurant in a part of town I had not visited. A beauty appointment. 2 charges from a home goods store for items that were not in my house. Individually, they looked like billing errors. Together, they told a different story. And then I found something larger. A credit inquiry I had not initiated, from a mortgage company, dated 6 weeks prior. I sat with that paper in my hands for a very long time. That evening I called the credit union. I did not explain everything. I said I had noticed some unfamiliar activity and wanted to review what authorizations existed on my accounts. The woman on the phone was patient and thorough. When she read back the list of authorized users, there was one name I had not added. My daughter-in-law had been listed as an authorized user on my secondary checking account since the previous spring. My son had added her. I had never been asked. I had signed something during a joint errand to the bank that I now understood had not been what it appeared. I thanked the woman and said I would come in the following morning. I did not tell either of them what I had found. That evening I made dinner, helped Tyler with a puzzle, watched half a television program I could not follow, and went to bed at 9 o'clock like everything was ordinary. The next morning I was at the credit union when it opened. The branch manager, a composed woman named Patricia who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, sat across from me while I laid out what I had. She went very still when I showed her the mortgage inquiry. She asked me several careful questions. Then she said she wanted to bring in someone from their fraud department to sit with us, and I said yes. His name was Robert, which almost made me cry for a reason I could not have explained quickly. He was calm and deliberate, and used small, clear sentences, the way people do when they are being precise on purpose. He confirmed that the mortgage inquiry had been made using my full financial profile. He confirmed that the inquiry was associated with a property address I did not recognize. He said the situation had patterns consistent with what the department called elder financial exploitation, and that there were legal protections available to me if I wanted to use them. I said I did. I also called Beverly from the parking lot and told her what I had found. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Helen, you need to know something. My niece works at a title company. About 3 weeks ago, she processed a preliminary consultation on a property transfer that had your address on it. She didn't know it was you. She mentioned it to me in passing because the paperwork looked unusual. I didn't connect it until now. There it was. Not just a house they were trying to buy with my savings. They were looking at ways to move the title on my house as well. The meeting my daughter-in-law had mentioned on the phone, the one with the so-called financial planner, was scheduled for the following Saturday. I knew because she had mentioned it to my son over breakfast. Casually. Something about the planner confirming Saturday at noon, and my son had nodded without looking up from his phone. I had been sitting right there. They were not hiding it from me because they did not believe I was paying attention. That realization did something to me. Not anger, not quite. More like a cold, settling clarity. They had looked at me and seen someone they did not need to be careful around. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Beverly helped me understand the documents Robert from the credit union had given me. I called a legal aid line and spoke with an attorney who advised me on what to bring and what to say. I made copies of everything and stored them in 2 places. I changed every financial password and removed every unauthorized name. I froze the secondary account and opened a new primary account that no one but me had access to. And I waited. On Friday afternoon, Beverly called me. "Helen," she said, and her voice had shifted into something careful. My niece looked deeper into that title consultation. She found the name of the planner they're using. He's not a financial planner. He's a notary and document preparer. He specializes in family estate transfers. He's been involved in 3 previous cases where elderly homeowners signed documents they later said they didn't understand. My throat tightened. 3 cases. All 3 had dementia or confusion listed in the paperwork as justification for transfer, even though none of them had been diagnosed. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. "They're going to say I'm confused," I said. It was not a question. Beverly was quiet for a moment. "If you push back, that's probably their next move. I think you need someone in that room with you on Saturday." I called Robert at the credit union. He said he could arrange for someone from the fraud department to be present and suggested I also consider having the attorney I had spoken with either present or available by phone. I said yes to both. Then I said, "I need this to happen where there are other people, where I have witnesses too." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Would you consider letting it proceed as scheduled and having our people there when it does?" I understood what he was asking. He wanted to catch them in the act, with documentation, with witnesses, in a setting where the full picture would be visible and hard to dispute later. I said yes. That Saturday I dressed carefully in a grey blouse and the slacks I wore to Gerald's retirement party, the ones he always said made me look like a woman who meant business. I sat at the breakfast table and drank my coffee and helped Tyler eat his oatmeal and did not let my face show a single thing I was thinking. My daughter-in-law was bright that morning, almost glowing. She wore a new blouse I had not seen before, another charge I would find later on my statement. She told Tyler they would go to the park in the afternoon. She reminded my son twice about looking sharp. He nodded both times, and I noticed he would not quite meet my eyes, which told me what I already knew. He was not innocent, but he was not comfortable. We drove together to a downtown office suite that had a meeting room with a round table and a tray of water glasses, and a man named Glenn, who introduced himself as a planning consultant. Glenn was professional in a surface way, practiced smiles, a good handshake, a folder already open in front of my seat. He said it was wonderful to meet me and that he had heard so many great things. My daughter-in-law smiled. My son shifted in his chair. Glenn began with language about family legacy and protecting assets for future generations. He used words like streamline and consolidate and simplify the process. He put a document in front of me and said it was a straightforward family trust framework that would protect my home and savings from probate and ensure everything passed cleanly to my son. I looked at the document. It was not a trust framework. It was a transfer authorization combined with a limited power of attorney. Beverly had shown me what one looked like. I looked up. Before I read any further, I said, "I'd like to introduce someone." The door to the small adjoining office opened. Robert from the credit union walked in with a woman I had not met before, who introduced herself as an attorney with the state's Elder Financial Protection Office. Behind them came Beverly's niece, who carried her own folder. My daughter-in-law's face changed in a way I will not forget. Not just surprise. Recognition. The kind that comes when someone understands the plan has already been read. My son went very still. Glenn reached for his own folder. The attorney spoke before he could. "Mr. Glenn, we're aware of 3 previous cases in which you facilitated document signings involving homeowners who later reported they did not understand what they were signing. We'd like to review the documents you've prepared here before anyone signs anything." My daughter-in-law stood up. "This is a private family meeting." Robert looked at her evenly. "Mrs. Helen is our client. And these documents were preceded by an unauthorized mortgage inquiry using her financial profile. That makes this our concern." My son said my name. Just my name. Like a question with no answer attached to it. I looked at him. "Marcus," I said, because I had been calling him by his relationship to me long enough inside my own head, and I wanted him to hear his own name spoken plainly. "I know about the house. I know about the inquiry. I know about the title consultation. I know about all of it." The room was very quiet. My daughter-in-law's voice turned to ice. "You went through our private conversations. You had them in my house," I said, "at my dining room table, while I was standing in my hallway." She looked at my son. He did not look back at her. The attorney asked Glenn to hand over his copies. He did so after a pause that lasted 1 second too long. She reviewed the first 2 pages and quietly confirmed what Beverly had prepared me to expect. The document would have transferred co-ownership of my home and given my daughter-in-law joint authority over my primary financial accounts. "This is for family stability," my daughter-in-law said, and her voice had shifted now into something softer and more careful, the voice of someone recalibrating. "Marcus has debt he needs to address. We have a child. We needed a foundation. You have more than enough." I had heard those words before. In a different voice, in a different story, but the same words. "You have more than enough." "What I have," I said, "I earned over 30 years, and I watched my husband work himself to exhaustion alongside me to protect it. It belongs to me, not to your plans." She started to say something about Tyler, about his future, about family not abandoning family. I let her finish. Then I said, "I love Tyler more than you know, and using a child as a reason to take someone's home is the least loving thing in this room." That silence was different from the others. It had weight. Robert spoke then, calmly, and explained that the credit union had flagged the unauthorized inquiry and was opening a formal review. He said that, depending on what the review found, there could be further action. Glenn packed his folder and left before anyone asked him to. My son had not said a word since I spoke his name. When the attorney and Robert stepped to the side to review the documents, he looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face since he was about 14 and had broken something he thought I did not know about. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Long enough." He rubbed his hands over his face. I told her this was too far. I said it more than once. "You also didn't stop it." He didn't answer, which was its own answer. My daughter-in-law had moved to the window and stood with her back to the room. She was holding her phone but not looking at it. The glowing morning she had walked into this building with was completely gone. I gathered my copy of the documents, my purse, and my cardigan from the back of the chair, and I said to my son, "I'd like you and your family to be moved out of my house within 30 days. I will help with Tyler however I can, but I'm done being managed in my own home." He nodded once, slowly, like someone accepting a verdict they had already known was coming. I thanked Robert and the attorney. I hugged Beverly's niece, who looked like she might cry. Then I walked back through the lobby of that office building and out into the light. The next few weeks were hard in the specific way that honest things often are. My son found a rental apartment 20 minutes away. It was smaller than they wanted and cost more than they hoped. He took extra work. He put some furniture in storage and some things in my garage with my permission, which he asked for this time. My daughter-in-law said almost nothing to me in those 30 days. She moved through the house like a weather system that had lost its power source, quiet and contained, packing boxes while Tyler followed behind her, asking questions she answered in half sentences. Tyler asked me one afternoon while we were reading on the porch why everybody was packing. I thought for a moment and said that sometimes families need more space to figure things out, and that no matter where people lived, love didn't have a mailing address. He thought about that. Then he asked if he could still come over for grilled cheese. Every single time. I told him. There was no clean resolution with my daughter-in-law. She said something, eventually, that was technically an apology, but was built mostly to protect herself. The kind of sorry that is really a sentence about other people's misunderstanding. I accepted it the way you accept weather, not gratefully, just without fighting what it was. With my son it was different and more complicated, and would take longer. He came by one evening about 3 weeks after the move, alone, and stood in the kitchen doorway the way he used to do as a teenager when he needed to say something that was hard. He said he had started seeing a financial counselor about the debt. He said he had told the counselor the full truth, including his part in what had happened with me. He said he knew an apology did not undo what almost occurred, and that he was not asking me to pretend otherwise. What he said next was the thing I have turned over most in the months since. He said, "Mum, I convinced myself that because you had more than us, what we were doing was just redistributing. I gave it a name that made it easier to live with. I'm ashamed of that name now." I did not tell him it was fine. I told him it was honest. Those are different things, and he was old enough to know the difference. The credit union's review confirmed the unauthorized account access and the fraudulent mortgage inquiry. The documentation Beverly's niece had provided was part of a larger pattern the state office was already tracking. I will not say more about that than what is necessary, but I will say that Glenn, the notary consultant, faced consequences that were more than a conversation. I updated my will. I met with a legitimate estate attorney, who spent an entire hour explaining what each document meant before I signed a single page. I set up a financial power of attorney with Beverly as my agent, a woman I have known for 22 years, who would rather drive me to an appointment at 6 in the morning than sign a piece of paper without my full understanding. I changed my locks. I planted tomatoes in April, the first time in 3 years I had bothered with the garden. Gerald had been the gardener, and after he died I let the beds go to weeds as if that were some form of loyalty to his absence. This spring I pulled the weeds, amended the soil, and put in 4 tomato plants and 2 rows of green beans. Something about doing it made me feel like myself again in a way that is hard to name precisely. Beverly came over on a Saturday in late May, and we sat on the porch with iced tea and a plate of crackers, and she said, "You know what I keep thinking about?" I said I didn't. She said, "You did all of this without raising your voice once." I thought about that for a moment. Then I said that Gerald used to tell me that the loudest thing a person can do sometimes is simply refuse to pretend. She nodded. We sat with that for a while. Tyler comes over twice a week. His parents share custody in the careful, formal way that people do when trust has to be rebuilt from the floor up. He brings his backpack, and sometimes a library book he wants me to read to him, which makes me love him in a way that is almost painful. Last week he brought a drawing he had made at school. It was our house, the blue one with the white porch, and he had drawn a woman standing in the garden and labelled her Grandma Helen in his careful, unsteady handwriting. He had put a sun in the corner with a smiley face and a rainbow over the roof. He asked if he could keep it at my house, so he would always know where to find it. I put it on the refrigerator. Some evenings I still sit at the kitchen table after dinner with a cup of tea that goes half cold, and I hear the house settle around me the way old houses do, and I think about Gerald, and about the woman I was before all of this, the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace, the one who mistook loneliness for permission to be used. I don't miss being her. What I know now that I did not know 18 months ago is something I want to say plainly, because I think a lot of people listening to this are sitting with a version of the same slow erosion and have not yet found the word for what it is. There is a difference between loving your family and financing a story they have written about you. One is a choice made freely. The other is a slow removal of choices until you stop noticing they are gone. If the people in your home have stopped asking and started assuming, that is not comfort. That is entitlement. Learning your schedule. If the kindness you receive spikes whenever something is wanted and drops when it is not, that is not love with a variable mood. That is management with a smile. You are not obligated to fund someone else's version of your life at the cost of your own. The tomatoes are doing well this summer, by the way. Better than I expected for a first season back. Gerald would have had something cheerful to say about that. I can almost hear it when I am out there in the evening light, pulling a weed here and there, listening to the neighborhood go quiet. I am still here. Still standing in my own house, in my own garden, on my own terms. That is the ending I gave myself. And no one is going to rewrite it. If this story reached something true in you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're going through something similar right now, please know this. You are not too old. You are not too soft. And it is never too late to protect the life you built.